talks, which is for members only, members of the studio only. I'm Ilaria, for those of you who don't know, but I think everyone kind of knows me by now. So I'm the Heritage Engagement Officer here at IEP, and we've produced a series of talks for members to invite previous members of staff or current members of staff in the studio to sort of talk about their experience editioning and shed a light into this process of editioning. It all started with Jill's talk last year, I think it was 2 years ago. She was very popular, and we decided to sort of continue it. And Alfons, we're very glad, so very grateful that Alfons decided to sort of join in this series. Alfons has been a technician, etching technician at Edinburgh Printmakers. He was technician for 30 years, and he's going to tell us about his experience working here during those 30 years, but also his training at Atelier 17 in Paris, working with Hayter, and also his work with Paragon Press, I believe, and also his own publishing studio, Bonfire Editions, and also he is now currently senior technician at Northumbria University in Newcastle. So I'm going to leave it with you. And these talks, for those of you who's maybe this is the first one you've come to, they're quite informal, so we're not going to have questions at the end. You're kind of welcome to ask questions as we go, according to sort of what Alfons is going to show us. And my colleague Meg has selected, well, we've selected together with Alfons some prints from our collection, and Meg has brought them up, so she's going to pass them around on the table. So I might ask you if you have a drink to kind of move it off the table, so that we make sure say remains. Yeah, great. Thanks everyone, and I'll leave it to you, Alfons.
Yep. Thank you all for coming. I know quite a few people would gladly pay not to hear me go on about printmaking. So I've called this a passion for print. So yeah, it is about editioning, it is about printmaking, but it's kind of a sort of summing up of all the fun little things that I've got involved with, which usually involve printmaking over the years, and my kind of long involvement with this venerable institution, Edinburgh Printmakers. So, give you a little bit of background. So this is me in my current home at printmaking studio at Northumbria University in Newcastle. I was born originally in the Scottish Borders, very long time ago, last century. I went to Edinburgh College of Art in the 1970s, 1972 to 1977, and I have a former classmate with me. So when I was studying drawing and painting at Edinburgh, like quite a lot of people who went through the system there was a really good printmaking department with really good teachers. Kirkland Main was the person who taught me in particular. And out of that early kind of involvement with printmaking came a kind of lifelong passion for print. So just to give you a bit of background about what I do as an artist before we move on to work with other people. Some of you know me of old will know that I was a kind of intaglio specialist, but since moving to Newcastle, since working in a print studio in Newcastle, I've had to diversify, and it keeps on morphing as well. Things come along and I've got to change tack. So I'm now a kind of screen printer. I should probably say I'm a sort of amateur screen printer, since we've got John in the office. But also, kind of more recently, I've been doing things like making artist books, and they combine things that are kind of printed in collage, and working with students, it even takes me into the world of zines. I had to produce little fun things. This is me from quite a while ago. Edinburgh Printmakers. One of the things when I was working at Edinburgh Printmakers is we spearheaded some new techniques in intaglio printing, which involved a lot of kind of endless testing of materials and the chemicals that are used in etching. So this is me at play in Union Street. I thought since we should really kind of talk about edition in some shape or form, I thought I'd put in this quote. Some of these slides are from a previous talk that I gave at the university, which was about printing, printers working with artists. So this is a quote from Catherine Brown, who set up the Crown Press, and it's a good artist uses the printer's skills and makes the most of them. And a good printer becomes immersed in the artist's vision and does everything in his or her power to carry it out. And it's a kind of good summation of the kind of relationship. There is another really nice quote by Robert Motherwell. It's quite a long quote, and I'll kind of paraphrase it. So basically, Robert Motherwell, the American abstract expressionist painter, sets out by saying, basically, he says, printmakers are a bit of a pest. They tend to blow things out of proportion. So some tiny little mark becomes a major sort of feature. They tend to idolize certain things. And if you're a printmaker and you're reading it, you go, shit, what's he talking about? And then he says, but on the other hand, there are times I've thought the artist's intention is so meager, so impoverished, that I rely on the printmaker to tell me which direction to go in and blah, blah. So he evens it up. Really nicely. Again, another sort of archive shot is me demonstrating the art of printing to my memory. If my memory serves, this was friends of the Royal Scottish Academy who came to Union Street. So my kind of early involvement with printmaking at Edinburgh College of Art was influenced by people that were really quite prominent at the time, particularly in printmaking. And the really obvious one that made me really interested in etching was David Hockney. And these are really early Hockney etchings. Hockney is a really, really fine printmaker and has indeed worked with lots of very famous artists and printmakers. Lesser known is this German artist called Friedrich Merksetter, and he's kind of little known now. There is a fantastic print by Friedrich Merksetter in the City Art Centre that I have never seen displayed for a very long time. Wouldn't it be nice to see it again? So it is, these are colour etchings and aquatints. They're really technically, I mean, apart from the imagery, they're technically superb. His work's also got something, little connection with Terry Gilliam, from the Monty Python days. That might have later on, I was lucky enough, through connection with Edinburgh Printmakers, to spend 3 months in Paris at Atelier, which at that time was run by British printmaker Stanley William Hayter, who's really well known. And it was really quite fantastic to actually chat to somebody to whom Picasso, Miro, Jackson Pollock, and Nias Nen, Brassai, you name it, were all people that he knew. You know, he said to me, well, you know, Picasso was a small man, about your height. So, that's quite unusual to have that experience, and I kind of think that it was a really influential thing. This is a page from a notebook of mine from Paris at the time, and this is Hayter explaining to me about mirror images and inversion in the play. He was a scientist by training, so he had a very scientific mind. So all this is just to give you a little bit of background about my interests and influences. Another person, and this was a bit later on, was the Italian artist Giorgio Morandi. And Morandi, as well as being an absolutely fantastic painter of still life, made wonderful etchings. He also had the job that I would really want to aspire to, because he was professor of etching at Bologna University, and he worked Friday afternoon and Saturday morning. And I think that's a really good job. He didn't do it all his life, but yeah. So, let's zero in a little bit. So, my involvement with Edinburgh Printmakers actually started before 1979. So, I finished at Edinburgh College of Art in 1977 after doing a postgraduate. And became a member of the studio then, and I also was on the council briefly for a time. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But my actual employment was from 1979 to 2009. In that time, I actually started to work with artists. We'll come to some slides, but I'm going to focus on some of the key artists that I kind of worked with and developed, in some cases, a really nice working relationship with. Probably the most crucial and good one to start with is John Bellany. As a student, I'd been really wowed by John Bellany, and was really not influenced by his work, but I was really aware of it and saw him as a major painter. In much the same way as Alan Davey, and this is a double portrait by Bellany of Bellany and Alan Davey. I didn't know there was going to be somebody from the City Art Centre. Lots of stuff to do with the City Art Centre. So this is the Bellany I was always really familiar with. This is in the collection of the City Art Centre. So that was seeing this huge painting on 2 6x4 sheets of hardwood put together. Was really quite impressive. So I was very excited when in 1982 I got a chance to meet John and to work with him. And here is a connection between Picasso and John Bellany. So, I joined the Printmakers workshop. I wasn't involved in the original time, which is at Victoria Street. I was involved when it was at Market Street, in what is now entirely the Fruit Market Gallery. So before, there used to be the Fruit Market Gallery. Upstairs was Edinburgh Printmakers and the new 57 Gallery. And that was a really great sort of trio of organisations. There were some fantastic artists who showed the 57 Gallery, everyone from Jorgen and Dorf, Barry Flanagan, people like that who were kind of international. Downstairs was the Fruit Market Gallery, and they showed people like Jean-Michel Basquiat. Basquiat's first show in the UK was actually at the Fruit Market Gallery. I remember that show. So one day, I can't remember what he was called, what his position was. But anyway, he was the guy, the technical guy in charge of everything at the Fruit Market Gallery, Jimmy Rice. He got a phone call from the Albert Hall Gallery in Kendal. And they said, we discovered a crate that belongs to the Scottish Arts Council. And he said, what's in it? He said, no, we've not opened it. He said, how long have you said you've had this? Oh, we've had it for years. Go and have a look and see what's in it. and they came back and they said, it's Picasso prints. And inside that crate was the entire Buffon suite by Picasso. So if you know about the Buffon suite, it's a suite of sugar lift etchings by Picasso. And it had actually been there before the setting up of the Arts Council, because this was the Scottish Committee for the Arts, which was the actual predecessor of that. Nobody knew who these prints actually belonged to. So they were shown at Edinburgh Printmakers, and I was asked to do a little kind of technical expose of what sugar lift etching was, which was really good because I'm very influenced by Norman Ackroyd, who's a master of that technique, who will feature in this talk a bit later. So I was keen when I met John to actually try out some sugar lift etching with him. And one on the left-hand side, that is one of the 5 prints, I think, from the Celtic Quintet, which was the first folio that we did. It was published by Alan Ball, the writer. There's Alan Ball's poems in there, with the sugar lift etchings. So it's a nice kind of confluence of things going on there. And then later on, I did more kind of traditional line etchings with another folio which is called Homage to McDermott, again published by Alan Ball. So I had a really good working relationship with John. He was really nice to work with. I should say, though, the Jesmond prints from the Celtic Quintet was really at the height of when John's drinking problem was really, was really at the fore then. His paintings were quite wild. It was quite a wild sort of way of working. So it was quite interesting to continue to work with John. So we were doing things with him before his liver transplant, and then we did things after that, glad to say. So yeah, it was a really interesting time to be working with John. I remember he did this big mono print at the time, so or monotype. This was printed on a large offset press that we used to have, not by me. It was printed by Ken Duffy, and I always remember Ken saying, "Well, the great thing about monotypes is one of the few times that the actual artists work harder than the printers." And this is a kind of print from later on. This is John Bellany etching of an owl. I seem to remember I read Helen Bellany's book about John, and there was something in that about finding a dead owl. So John never really explained any of the imagery to me, but I think maybe that relates to drawings he must have made at the time. In terms of collaboration, because I suppose that's what we need to talk about. There are different ways of collaborating with an artist, and sometimes it's very hands-off. And in a way, John Bellany was very hands-off. The story was really that John would draw on I would prepare the etching plates, John would draw on the etching plates, and then he would bring them in, and I would say to him, "John, how do you want me to bite these etching plates? Do you want me to bite them heavily, or do you want them to be light, or how do you want?" And pardon the slight rudity here, but he said, "Alfons, just bite the arse of them." Okay, so that was his technical instruction, which I didn't really follow. But he kind of liked the way that I was able to do it. So technically, they're very simple. They're line etchings. We've actually got a copy of the actual print. And I was remarking earlier that this is from a period where we started to use the new grounds, and it was made for, I think, BBC documentary. So I remember John actually operating the press, which is something he never did when it was being filmed at Union Street. John Bellany's association with Edinburgh Printmakers goes back a long way, and also he's kind of associated, as I'm sure you all know, with the artist Sandy Moffat. And there was also a period of time, which there's going to be a few artists who can talk about, where we were making prints with a group of artists that were represented in a kind of landmark show at the Gallery of Modern Art, which was called The Vigorous Imagination. Some of you might remember that show. So there were all kinds of artists in that show: Stephen Campbell, Wisniewski. This is a portrait of Adrian Wisniewski. And at that time, there was an idea to do an exhibition to accompany the exhibition at the Gallery of Modern Art. So we had an exhibition at Union Street of prints made by these artists, and they were all made from scratch for the exhibition. So it meant a lot of work from myself, from Ken Duffy, who was printing lithographs, and it was a really successful show. We've got, actually, the one I want you to show is Stephen Conroy. So Stephen Conroy, Stephen was the youngest artist in the show. He was a recent graduate at that time from Glasgow School of Art, and he made 3 giant lights for the show. This is Megaphone Man, this is one of them. And I said to him, we talked about editioning. I said, well, how many prints do you want in the edition? And he went, 2? So we managed to push him up to 10, and we printed 10, and those editions all sold out before the show ended. So it was really successful, and the proofs became a bit like hen's teeth. Later, I sold my printers to proof to buy an etching press, which is nice. So I'm sure you'll know the printer gets a printer's proof, part of the tradition. So this is, so Sandy was involved with all these artists. There was a period of time where he got very into etching and was doing their portraits and making them into prints. This is a dry point of Adrian Wisniewski, and we've got a portrait of Peter Howson made by Sandy at the time, when he was a sort of youth. So the other kind of person that was a real kind of hero of mine. I mean, I remember having a book before I went to art college, which was about artists. And there was a photograph in this book of a guy with a big beard and a glider, and a sports car. So I went, wow, this guy's an artist. Really is an artist. So this was Alan Davey. And Alan Davey, I got to work with Alan a bit later on in the 1990s. He was introduced to Edinburgh Printmakers through Professor Henry Walton, who was chairman of Edinburgh Printmakers. And there was a period where Alan was also involved in making a tapestry for the new Royal, it's not so new now, but the Royal Infirmary. So he's working with Dovecot Studios, and we were making prints with them at the same time. This is the first print that we made with Alan Davey. And this is called Insignias for Magic. And magic appears quite a lot in this presentation. uphill line as well. So this is Insignias for Magic. And it was drawn on film by Alan, and then we made it into a photo etching. And it also has sheen collé. So this is a layer, the colour comes from a layer of Japanese paper, which is adhered onto the plate. It's a technique that I used quite a lot at that time, worked really well for, particularly for black and white etchings. So here's a historic photograph. This is the day where we had a kind of wonderful collision. So we had a visit from Norman Acroyd, who's here and up there, and Alan Davey and his wife Billy. So there's also in the photograph there's David Walton and Professor Henry Walton. And some of you may know this is Dr. Michael Phillips, who's an expert on William Blake and William Blake facsimiles at Edinburgh Printmakers. So it's quite a gang there, and that was and this is Norman encouraging Alan to do a sugar lift applicant. So we're back to the sugar lift thing. So Alan Davey, hugely influential international artist. The nice thing about meeting Alan was going to lunch with Henry Walton and actually hearing about his trip to the States. He was invited to show in a gallery in the early 1960s. And, he's saying, well, we arrived at the airport and we were met at the airport by Jackson Pollock, who then took us to the Seagull Tavern where all these guys hung out. So, that's where Moffat and Peter Howson and all these people there. So again, it's this really, really interesting meeting somebody to whom these sort of huge figures in the history of art are real people. David was somebody who made a lot of prints with a Curwen. This is a lithograph called Celtic Dreamboat, and they're usually published in variations. So the kind of different colour variations is all part of the game that Alan used to like to play. So we at Edinburgh Printmakers, myself, working with Alan, we produced a series of etchings. Now, Alan Davey was really quite old at this time. Not that he was particularly frail, he was still very fit and active, doing all kinds of things, playing the piano, playing the saxophone. Latterly, he'd been a scuba diver, pilot, but he had a really busy schedule. So the reason I'm telling you this is you might be interested in how these things were produced. So what Alan did was he came with a sheaf of black and white ink drawings, and we looked at them, and those drawings were actually used as the basis of making photo etched plates from them. And then we printed those using the sheen collé technique that was in Insignias for Magic. I did do some experiments trying to introduce colour and trying to get Alan interested in colour, but sometimes working with artists is difficult, let me tell you. So he was having none of it. Okay? So we have to try and understand another thing, that sometimes there is a limit to which you can lead an artist into something. So, for instance, Picasso, when he was working with printers, he talked about there being two types of printmaking. So there was nature, which is, as you might imagine, is just as it comes. You don't do anything to it, you just print it simply. And the other one was avec sauce. And Picasso's explicit instructions were he did not want any sauce. the printers were not to muck about. But having said that, Picasso was a strange man, because he did odd things. So when he was working, I think, with Courier, there's a very famous etching of his called Minotaur Machi, I think is right. So it's a fantastic etching. It's a black and white etching. And Picasso paid the printers to print it on New Year's Eve in colour. And I think, and this is my opinion, those prints are really horrible. And Picasso was right, he shouldn't have been playing about that. For some reason, he had strange superstitions about death and things like that. And he obviously wanted to be doing something on New Year's Eve instead of celebrating the end of the year or whatever. That's not from my personal reminiscences, of course. This is one of my favourite Allen dates, Deep the Ghost. It's quite a big one. And we used a kind of nice white Japanese paper, which has got sort of slight sort of strands, I can't speak now, strands of sort of shiny stuff going through it. So you can't really see it in the slide. But I think it's a lovely print. There's insignias for magic. So I really enjoyed working with Alan. It was limited in its scope. So it was limited in its scope because of the time element. But the nice thing I can say, and I always say this to people, I'm lucky to have had a cuddle from two of Scotland's greatest artists. I've been cuddled by John Bellany and I've been cuddled by Alan Day. Very nice tactile people. That's part of the perks of edition being a printer. So, we've kind of touched on this show, The Vigorous Imagination. Peter Howson, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with, was part of that show. And Peter made four etchings for that show, 4 heads. And this one that you're going to see is Johnny from those 4 heads. And that sparked off a whole suite. These were the first 4 prints. That sparked off a whole suite called the Saracen Heads. And those suites are named after, we were talking about this afternoon, they're named after a sort of notorious pub in Glasgow's Gallowgate called the Saracen Head. It was frequented by lots of down and outs and ne'er-do-wells. And I don't think these are accurate representations, but they stand for Glasgow characters. And there's about 25, 26 of these heads, and they were all etched in the old method, so that these were using traditional wax crowns, etched in nitric acid by me, and then printed in editions of 50 or 30, I can't remember. So there's a lot of printing going on. Does it have an edition? It's because there was a separate edition as well. There's a box set which has an original drawing. So you've got the box, I don't have the box, but you've got the box, but I think you haven't got a drawing.
We do have a drawing.
You do have a drawing. Yeah. Oh, well, you have the whole thing there.
Yeah.
So that was a big job. There was a guy helping me at the time. So this is getting into the nitty-gritty of editioning. There was a guy at the time called Kenny Waldron, who's a young guy who went on to study at Glasgow and got thrown out in his first year. And Kenny was really fast. And I said to him, Kenny, you're printing these too quickly, mate. What will happen is you'll hit the wall. It's like an athlete, you've got to pace yourself. And it was one morning, it was like 10 o'clock, no Kenny, 11 o'clock, no Kenny, 12 o'clock, still no Kenny, eventually sort of came in and he had a really severe hangover. And I said, you hit the wall, Kenny. It got to you. Because, well, let's face it, if you're printing a really big job, it's boring. You know, there's no way around it. It's actually quite boring. The good thing about it is it becomes second nature. It becomes nice and fast. It's really nice as well to have somebody help you. So latterly, when I was printing the Alan Davies, for instance, I had a very, very nice assistant called Gordon Boyd, and Gordon was my clean hand man. So there's a lot of stuff, as I'm sure you know, with etchings, where you've got to not only print the damn things, but you've got to put them on drying boards and get them dry and change the blotters and put them back in again and make sure they're not too bumpy. You've also got to soak the paper for the next lot of etchings. You've got to make sure that the paper is not too dry and the paper is not too wet. And if you're fiddling about with things like sheet fillet, that's another thing that you've got to take into consideration. And at the end of the day, you know, often clients, punters look at these things and they go, that's really nice, you got any in colour? So, Peter Howson. Peter is a legend, I suppose, now. And I'm sure a lot of you know about Peter. But trigger finger here. But Peter, I think, really took to the etching. He's a really great draftsman. He can draw, although sometimes I was looking at a painting in Newcastle on Monday and it was, God, I can't say this in this room, can I? This is like this god-awful painting. There's horribly drawn hands and things. But he can really draw when he tries. So the Saracens' heads are a great sequence. So there's a set in the Tate, there's a set of modern art in New York. So it was a really successful project. And again, it's very simple. You know, a lot of stuff I was doing, technically very simple, just relying on the artist making a damn good drawing on the ground, and then it was my job to try and etch these things. So I always used to try and make sure that we had nice, fresh nitric acid that would etch these things nicely without breaking up the line work. If you are very technically into etching, you know that nitric not only bites down, but it bites out the way. So ferric chloride is pretty sort of straight down. But I always used to like the old nitric because you got this widening of the lines effect, which you could use really nicely. But the problem is, if you've got lots of close cross-hatching, as we have in this etching, is to make sure that it doesn't break up in the etching. If you look at Goya's etchings, you'll find out that he never cross-hatched anything, and he's actually shading just with parallel lines. And that's probably because they were bitten in quite strong nitric acid. Copper plates, you need to use 1 to 3 nitric acid around that strength. So he's kind of avoiding the problem by deliberately not crossing the lines. So most of them, maybe not all of them, most of them are sort of in that kind of parallel line thing. We need to include some women artists. So I didn't have a kind of long period of working with Barbara Ray. Initially, we made some small plates. So these are quite small colour etchings. They're about maybe a bit bigger than the A5. But those, which I thought were really nice, we made kind of bigger versions of them. I think you'll see that here. So this is the small version of Karen Skew Hillside. and this is the bigger version. So this is about that size. This is still the era of zinc and nitric acid. So these are multi-plate, but also with inking up in different colours on the plate, and also slightly playing about with the viscosity of the inks, which is what Hayter was into. So more by accident than design, to be honest. But the yellow should have been subsumed by the black on top, but it actually ended up coming through really, really nicely. There's no rolled colour, but there is an effect of the viscosities because the yellow was really stiff and stands out. There is a rolled colour in this one, which is the grey. You okay? Got water, but not extra glass. So yeah, these were nice little experimental plates. Later on, I did a photopolymer print with Barbara, which is called Incubate, but I don't have that as part of the slideshow. So it's working in quite a free way. Barbara is very painterly, so it's adapting her method of working, trying to find a way that corresponds in etching. I've just had a look at my time here, and I remember actually back to John Bellany. I remember he did a talk for the RSA, and we were like about 3/4 of an hour in, and he was still talking about his childhood. So I'm kind of realising it's the same here. I'm sort of digressing, so I'll try and speed up a little bit so we get through the slideshow. So another artist I did quite a lot of work with, Spanish artist from Madrid, Roberto Fernandez Gonzalez. The first print that I did in the 1980s was a traditional soft ground etching. And then later on, we were working with photopolymer, so we've got a couple of Roberto's plates. So these were made from photographs of drawings, so scans of drawings, and using the photopolymer process, printing that in. And at that time, we also were printing with a sort of little blind embossed margin. So you get a kind of idea of Roberto's style, photoreal, but still got a very painterly sort of qualities to it. This is one which was actually photographic. So this is taken from a photographic sequence. Callum. So again, Callum was somebody that I developed quite a good working relationship with, and we were working. We originally, way back, we tried some more sort of traditional approaches, but for one reason and another, we were really compelled to look at the photopolymer process. And this is where it's interesting working with artists. So I said to Callum, well, you have to use different materials. So I'm going to give you a sort of sheet of plastic film, and I'm going to mix up a sort of mixture of gouache and Indian ink for you. You should paint the image with that. So eventually he came back with a roll of these things, and I said, did you use the ink that I made up for you? No, I just used oil paint. So what that necessitated was a lot of testing on my part to try and get the kind of marks, the image that he created using oil paint on film, trying to get as much detail out of those things as possible. Joe was probably there at the time. Joe might remember very long exposures on the graph exposure unit. I think I was exposing things on 138 minutes. So it was like through a really heavy layer of oil paint. So sometimes artists throw challenges your way. So, but in the end, they worked out really nicely. And these are quite big. And these are from film, the blue photopolymer film, the Photec film, applied onto large sheets of copper. We've got some smaller ones that we did, which were the first in the first batch. So these are solar plate, these are from pioneer plates. And these are printed with sheen pellet as well. So that there's a sort of white paper sheen pellet on the Somerset paper. No, it's not Somerset. It's Fabriano Artistico, 600 grams. And that's because that's the paper that Callum did these watercolours on. And it turned out, again, he was pushing me in the direction, but it turned out that this Fabriano 600 grams, Fabriano Artistico, which is designed to be a watercolour paper, was actually a very excellent printmaking paper. And I thought, and we'll try and do this quickly, I thought that we'd look at some other artists that I worked with at Edinburgh Printmakers. And this is the very first print I ever printed for somebody else. So this is now a friend of mine, this is Robert Shaw, who's a lawyer and etcher. Robert is now based in Orkney, in Kirkwood. But he was a past chairman of Edinburgh Printmakers.
He's still with us.
Still around, yeah, still with us, I'm glad to say. So this is called The Magician. You see, the interesting thing is that as I get older, I've gone back to childhood interest, and actually I'm really interested in magic. So this is actually quite poetic. It's about a magician. I've already been to the magic shop today. So magic was a figure in this. This is quite an interesting early one. These are from early 1980s, about 82, 83, that sort of thing. There's an artist called Gavin Scobie, who's a sculptor. There's an exhibition at Talbot Rouse of bronze sculptures, which were actually sort of books that folded in like wings, with sculptural objects in the centre. And we made some etchings, sort of in emulation of that, with a lot of scraping and burnishing, if you're into the techniques of etching to get the kind of textures. This is David Mickey. David was at Edinburgh College of Art. When I was there, son of Anne Redpath. And this was an etching that David made when he was in Ljubljana, in what was then, when he was there, it was actually Yugoslavia. And it's a two-part colour etching with a little bit of applied nonsense, these red streaks. This is Mary Newcomb, who's made quite a few prints with the Edinburgh Printmakers, mainly in silkscreen, but to keep her amused, I was drafted in to do a photopolymer etching with her. So she painted this on film. So this is a sheet with lambs. So quite diverse, quite diverse things. This is a Norwegian artist who also came to make lithographs. And again, to keep him amused between times, we made a little etching. This is Franz Wiederberg. He also gave a show at the Gallery of Modern Art. This is quite a small A5 plate, but quite nice, with a nice heavy hand aquatin. These are the days of traditional rosin aquatins. And this is, we made a series of prints for this chap who's called Michael Essing. Michael's originally from Edinburgh, I think, but at the time he was making these, he was actually living in Australia. But he got a residency at the Royal College of Surgeons. So he had this interest in anatomy. And actually, recently I was telling a student in Newcastle about cetus inversus. And situs inversus, if you don't know, and I presume you won't know, situs inversus is actually when all your organs, or at least some of them, are on the opposite side of where they should be. So your heart's on the left, so it's on the right if you've got situs inversus. And actually, I did actually meet somebody who had that. And it's very rare, so she was going to leave her body to medical science. So the interesting thing about being a printer, and I can remember printing these, I can remember sort of young women coming in and like, no, is that yours? And I said, no, and they went, oh, thank God. So they are a bit grisly. This is Robert Rivers, an American visitor, friend of George Donald. There's a little reference to Robert. Robert brought this plate over from the States. Big copper plate, very heavily etched with ferric chloride. A lot of sort of foul height and nonsense and things. It's a really fantastic plate. We made a print with Robert later on, and this is the colour etching, two-plate colour etching. Robert did a lot of things with elephants, and I asked him, why do you do all these things with elephants? He said it was because when he was a student, he had a job with a circus looking after the elephants. And the elephants are really well observed, although a bit fantastical. But yeah, it's Robert's elephant. This is Jake Harvey. I actually printed this plate twice, once in the Printmakers and once later on in my own studio. So this is an etched steel plate. This is the big monument. This is based on the big bronze monument that Jake did, and it's erected above Langland as a tribute to the poet-writer Hewlett Dermot. So this is it's a single plate colour etching, but it's got sort of selective whitening, this kind of burnt sienna and viridian colour. So these are a little taste of different kind of projects that I did at Edinburgh. In the kind of 1980s, I also had my own studio in Cumberland Street, next to what was then the Opera Gallery, in a basement, 71A Cumberland Street. And I did little projects for people, independent, sort of emulating the John Bellany, Alan Davey. I did a project with an artist called Fred Craig, who I was at college with poetry by George Dunn. And it was a folio. These are soft ground etchings. And then also was kind of independently printing for artists that I knew well. So this is June Carey. This etching was printed at Edinburgh Printmakers for June, which was a kind of publication for Society of Scottish Artists. So again, these are soft ground etchings. So nice. And this is, I just about forgot the name, this is Marge Bond, did printing for Marge. This is a really nice little heavily bitten steel plate with just the merest whisper of colour in it. Where I am now, I'll go through this quickly because there's more images and probably less to say. Where I am now is Northumbria University. Probably I am definitely going to retire in September. I'm partly retired at the moment. I was encouraged down there by Keith McIntyre, who some of you might know. Keith's a Scottish artist. He now stays in the far north. And here, you know, even in Northumbria, I do quite a bit of collaboration. So this is me collaborating with Keith. We're printing a big screen print, which he also used as part of an installation. He's into really quite wacky things, great things. So still involves collaborating. So working with a student, printing on silver wallpaper. It's different challenges working with students. Students tend to go, can you print on concrete? So it does help me. So just some shots of the studio. And we do a variety of things from the sort of traditional things, but also nice simple techniques. This is a card print, a card relief print. It's a very popular technique that we like working with students. It's even simpler than lino cutting, but has a really nice quality. Dry point, etching, photo etching, photopolymer, screen printing, and so screen printing, and then cyanotype, blueprint. Just before I left Edinburgh Printmakers, I got a mistress of blueprint to show me the technique, so Lena Murray, thank you. So I've been able to work with a lot of students at Northumbria and doing blueprint, and often on fabric. That's very popular. It's a nice way of working. There's sometimes staff projects. This was for a group of academics who called themselves Neuschloss, which is a kind of play on Newcastle. And then this was a nice project. So one of the students was screen printing images onto textiles, and then she made these cardboard tanks and covered them with the textiles, and then took them up to the edge of the north and photographed them in situ. So it's kind of printmaking thinking outside of the box. So you've got printing on records, which I think is something that goes on here. And this was a nice project. It's not a particularly great photograph, but it's actually one of the smaller pieces. But this was a student who she wanted to print on glass, and then we talked about it, and she really wanted it to look like engraved glass. So in the end, we found a glass that resembles a perspex that resembles glass, even with the green edges. And then we printed it in iridescent screening, so it actually had a slight sparkle to it. So it actually looked like it was cut into the glass. And you get nice shadows and things from it. So nice little projects, slightly different. On that kind of note, I've now entered into partnership with an ex-student, Nick Christie, and another artist, Showing, and we have our own studio it's now in Ousburn. We started off in Gateshead in a really very small space. This is my etching press. And it was great. It was a start. Nick used to have a studio that the building in Pilgrim Street, which was like kind of WASP studio, was pulled down to build what everybody needs, which is a tax office. So a lot of artists became homeless, and I said to Nick, well, if you're looking for somebody, if you're looking for a business partner, I'll join you because I'm thinking about retiring soon. So we started off in Gateshead. This is our little studio in Gateshead. And we run some courses and things, worked with a few artists there. And then we were lucky to get much bigger premises, which had already been set up as a screen print studio. So it has a nice screen bed, it's got a washout booth, it's got an exposure unit, and I've been able to take my etching press there. So it's really given us an opportunity to run classes. So these are some people that came to a class of mine. And since we're talking about editioning, and we're nearly at the end now, so I think I made up a bit of time. What I do is have my friend Lee Turner, who some of you might have heard of or know, and Lee operates a litho printing studio in Housebound, it's close by, in Newcastle. And Lee, like Alistair, was at Tamarind. Lee is a fully trained Tamarind master printer, so he's like the man. What I've done is I've gone to work with Lee, and that's when I become the artist and he's the printer. And it's a very funny relationship, and sometimes it's quite difficult. I go, you know? So it's an interesting experiment. And Lee totaled it up once, and I think I've never made something like, some of them were very small and very quick, but we made about 30 prints together over the years. This is one that we did, which I'm glad to say got into the Royal Academy. But I set myself a dreadful task because it's a black and white lithograph, hand coloured, with lots of colour in pencil, and it was taking me about an hour to do each one, and we had about 30 to do. But it was worth it. I don't think it was 30, but it seemed like 30. This is a more recent one. This is an actual colour lithograph. So we're working on stone. So I get to do the drawing, and this time I was obeying Lee's instructions. He said, I don't want you farting about doing things that we hadn't planned. Try and make a drawing and follow the drawing. The drawing's there. This is the drawing. Follow the drawing, and then we'll get there much quicker. And then, you know, as I'm working on it, he's going, you're changing it, aren't you? That's what I'm saying about the relationship between artists and printers. So this is the finished print. So it's got a black key, a grey, and the orange and the red. So it's a four color stone lithograph, and it's that size. And that's just me working on things. And we've done, as I say, quite a few different projects. This was done towards the end of the pandemic. So this was working on film. And Lee made such a good job that it almost looks like a drawing. It's just got all the qualities, preserved all the qualities of things. So the actual colour looks like it's hand coloured, but it's actually printed. I think that's the end. You've been very good and really asked almost no questions. But, do you have anything?
I wanted to ask, see the Susan Cameron paintings that I thought were lighter colour. Would they be different?
If they're in colour, then I think they might be the lithographs that he's made with Alistair.
So were you hear Alistair's talk? Yeah, so those were done years later. The colourful ones were done, well, they were displayed in 2020 and then shut just in pandemic. So it was like Alistair has to colour back from having worked with Alfons years later and then did lithographs instead. But that one that's black and white is instead a polymer. The one you showed with the colour time around.
But when you went to work in Newcastle at the Northumbria University, was the printing department set up as we saw, or did you go in and did you make improvements? I'm just asking because I did fine art at Newcastle University, and printmaking was very limited to screen printing. But we did start collections, which I suppose for me, that really inspired me. Although I've never forgotten, I don't know who the teacher was, but I remember her pouring liquid ground onto hot plates and having a small conversation. Anyway, but I just love the quality you got from it.
What happened is, I left Edinburgh Printmakers to go to Newcastle to start work at Northumbria University. But I had already been going down there through Keith McIntyre to do some sort of visiting, it's not visiting academic, but visiting technician, so I was working with students, blah, blah, blah. And I got to know the department quite well. But it was in a different building from the slides that you saw. And that had been there. It was a pretty ratty department, but they had good presses. So the nice thing is that universities often want things to happen and money is no object. So they didn't want the printmaking studio to be where it was in 2013 and they want to move everything. So to move it to the second floor in a building where they had to crane all the presses through the window. So, you know, that's the kind of thing universities do because money is no object. Or it was then, it is now, money is no object. So to answer your question, I'm very lucky at that point because I got to design the department and we got to buy some new equipment. So that was a really nice thing to be able to do. I should mention little connections as well because one of the technicians who used to have my job at Northumbria way back was a guy called John Bellany. Wonder what happened to him. So that was there. At Newcastle University, the person in charge is called Erica Servan, who's originally from Mexico, but Erica was also a member of Edinburgh Printmakers, and I actually wrote her reference for the job. So yeah, there's nice connections in Newcastle, Scottish and Newcastle.
I was just struck by one thing that's showing up. It feels like maybe 20, 30 years ago, more artists did printmaking as part of their broader practice. What would you suggest, or how could you persuade artists to try and build printmaking into their practice and come in and do some editioning here?
That is a really great question, and it's one that I talk about a lot. So here are my thoughts on that. So where we are now, well, there's a few things there. I'll try and answer it reasonably quickly. So one of the problems is, as far as I see it, is that printmaking is essentially, not entirely, but essentially a graphic medium. So it's got a relationship to drawing. And now we've got art schools that don't teach drawing anymore. So that's the first bang, that's the first hit. The second thing, and I've already mentioned this, is we've got students who are up against it financially, they've got jobs. One academic asked this guy, so why are you not coming in? He was a film and media student. He said, well, it's because I've got a job. And he said, well, what's your job? He said, I work in a pub. He said, well, how many hours do you work? And he said, 40. So how a student is able to sustain study and practice in the light of having to earn money, it's nobody's, the universities, the politicians don't seem to be willing to address too much. So one of the reasons I think I have to grow is our department is used less and less now. It's used okay for timetable sessions, but for students coming in and undertaking their own projects, which used to happen only a few years ago, and certainly pre-pandemic, it was happening. But now, some of the after effects of the pandemic, the encouragement to work online, having jobs, not being taught drawing, really, you know, as printmakers, we're seeing things happening. So I would say,
who are already established, or how could you encourage them to bring more printmaking into their practice?
sales. You know, some of the problems with working with artists, so some of the artists that I've talked about, so Callum Innes, Alan Daly, John Bellany, blah, is these guys, and Barbara Ray, these guys could all make far more money staying at home and making paintings and drawings than you could come into a printmaking studio. So it's actually their generosity a lot of the time that they come in and engage with printmaking. And, you know, we do sell the work, but actually, we are really a bit up against it. Printmakers since time immemorial, you know, in the 70s there was a BBC programme which featured Norman Ackroyd. It's probably the first time that I'd heard of Norman, called Artisan Print. And that was to educate the public then. That was on mainstream BBC One or whatever, might be BBC Two. You know, but it's not really worked. It's all the time we're trying to educate the public. But, you know. Now we've got G-clay prints, we've got lithographs, we've got all kinds of things. So it's increasingly different. But occasionally, artists and sometimes students get what it's all about and why it's really important and why we need to develop a passion for print. You know, sometimes it's, you know, I was thinking, trying to imagine what I would talk about, but I can't really convey, unless you've got the bug, I can't really convey how exciting and wonderful it is to see something that's beautifully printed and is a really great work of art. So here's a really terrifying example. I went to see the Alton Dix exhibition at Tate Liverpool, and I was lucky, I was the first person there in the morning. I'd worked it out. If you go to the Tate Liverpool, all these tourists have all been partying and going to the cabin the night before. So if you go there for 10 o'clock first thing, you'll probably be the only person there. So I went to see this Alton Dix exhibition, and I'm looking at this print, and I'm thinking, this is a really beautiful drive-by, and whoever printed it, because it wouldn't be Dix, whoever printed it made such a fantastic job of it. The subject of it was a sex murder. And it's a really, you know, horrible image, but the actual execution of the printing is like really beautiful. And that's the interesting thing about prints. Prints can face uncomfortable subject matter. We mentioned Goya, the disasters of war. I remember when I was in Paris, seeing Rouault's The Miseries of War. These are photogravures that Rouault worked on with so many different printmaking techniques. And I remember again being sort of really entranced and looking at it and saying, what was he using here? Was this roulette? Has he put an aquatinta over that? And I thought, this is the wrong way to look at these images. You have to look at them as images. You have to stand back and see. So, you know, there's all kinds of things there. When you get that, you know, when you're into printmaking, it's got so much, so you just hope that you do as best you can to encourage people. I don't think there's any magic thing. That if suddenly people say, oh, you know, everything I do in printmaking sells just like that, that'd be a really great incentive. But I don't think we're not going to engineer that one in a hurry. You know, it kind of happened in stages. There was a famous etching revival, which happened from the sort of 1880s. And etchings were kind of, as you probably know, etchings were kind of hugely popular. And lots of Scottish artists were part of that. So D.Y. Cameron, Muirhead Bone, all these people. And they fetched huge prices, Macintosh Patrick. They fetched huge prices for their etchings. But that market came to an end with the Wall Street crash in the 1920s. So E.S. Lonsdale, who is based in York Place in Edinburgh, who wrote the fantastic book, The Art of Etching, he had to resort to painting portraits to pay for his tax bill, because suddenly the market in etching had been huge and it just dried up. And it's interesting because art market has got a lot to do with things. We kind of pretend we're kind of shy virgins and we talk about money and, you know, nasty things. But that's it.
I think one problem I'm told printmaking we see like a correlation to painting. And students I was getting were the ones who were refused the painting school. And that's to go wrong because I think printmaking is such a skill in its own right, and it was quite difficult to assess. There was one young man, and his etchings were really tiny, but they were exquisite, and he really understood the process. But I had to persuade the tutors that he deserved an A for what he was doing, because it was little. But they weren't minor because they were small. But if you had a big painting, then I think it got more attention. But he really understood what the processes were.
So it's always been that way. Yeah, it's always been like that. And, in my time at Northumbria, there was often students were pushed towards printmaking who were maybe the lesser talented students. It's kind of funny. It's just part of the politics of that. Anybody else? Don't go home and go. I wish I'd asked that question. What was that thing he was talking about? And I never really understood what he was talking about.
I just think it's interesting to see Alan Davies.
Sorry?
Alan Davies' etchings were printed in black, and yet when a person counted him, there were his paintings which were so brightly coloured.
Yeah. But he did, Alan, in the summer when he went in a house in the West Indies, he actually, strangely, always made lots of brush drawings in black and white. So it was actually when he came back to the UK, he made these bigger paintings in colour.
We do have a test proof of his that has color in it that's going to be in the spring show.
Is it signed?
I can't remember.
It might not be.
No, it is. Alistair made it with him.
Oh, Alistair made
Yeah.
it. Oh, it's nothing to do with me then.